Hello everyone, and welcome to this Henry Stewart Events webinar. I'm Jeanette Camping, and it's great to see such a global audience of creative ops professionals joining us today. Today's webinar, 2023, Creative Resourcing During Economic Uncertainty, is sponsored by Brainrider. Please send in your questions, as we will be having Q&A at the end of the session, and we'll be sending you all a link to the recording of the webinar later. Now I'm delighted to welcome today's speakers, Scott Armstrong and Phillip Chagoya. Thank you both for joining us, and over to you, Scott.
Great, Jeanette. Hello, everybody. A big thanks to Henry Stewart Events for hosting this event. It's been a really great partnership, and I was just saying to Jeanette, I really like it when we all come together, even if it's virtually. And certainly during uncertain economic times is even more important to come together. And a big thank you to Phillip. Phillip has been a long-term Brainrider client in a few different roles. Phillip, if I say that right, and he's a real pro when it comes to understanding resourcing and resourcing options. So I was really pleased when he agreed to share the webinar with me. So hello, Phillip.
Hey, Scott. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Phillip Chagoya. I'm creative director at a company called Dandy. We do dental technology. And yeah, Scott, thanks for having me. It's exciting to be at the stage of my career where someone is asking for my opinion like this. So happy to contribute to the conversation.
Well, let's just get right into the conversation. And this is a quarter to do it. This is a year to do it after an amazing economic run of about a decade of really strong growth, particularly really strong growth in the technology sector, where Phillip, you've done lots of your career. Suddenly, the economy is hitting more than a speed bump, particularly on the West Coast. News has been filled over the past few weeks with technology companies cutting budgets and slashing staff and reorganizing and setting new priorities in the face of what's rough economic roads. So we all hear the news and are sort of seeing prices rise with inflation and worries about upcoming recessionary activity, and it's all hitting in the fourth quarter, where many teams are setting priorities and thinking through goals for 2023. And a more risky market just puts more pressure on us, on the creative operations sides of the house. You end up with project and budget uncertainty, misalignment with teams, staffing transition, and reorgs. I want to take a pause for a second, and I think we can run a poll, because I'd just like to get a sense from the audience of who is in fact facing some of those pressures. So let's take a second to do that poll. Give everybody, it should be popping up on your screen now. We've kept them easy today with just yes or no numbers. And it really doesn't matter. Like in Phillip, in your case, Dandy's really on a growth tear, right? You are probably thinking through your operations for 2023, but it's not how do you cut, it's really how do you get enough done. How's your team feeling for 2023 at Dandy?
Yeah. So Scott, I think all your observations are right about the turbulence and economic uncertainty. I think here in the Bay Area where I'm based, I think I read a Washington Post article the other day that so far there have been about 90,000 cuts when it comes to jobs in the various tech institutions that are out here. So it's certainly unsettling. I think there's a couple of things you can probably argue. It's market correction from the scaling that people did during the pandemic, and things are kind of going back to normal a bit. But yeah, Dandy, we're very lucky that we do dental technology, and dental services are still needed through any kind of economy. So for us, it's really more of a matter of how do we scale? We currently have a pretty small team because Dandy was founded about 2 years ago. So we're in a very lucky spot to have a lot of growth. and now it's just figuring out how to get more work done with a small team. And yeah, as you mentioned, I've worked with Brainrider at 3 different roles now. So that they have kind of become my go-to partner to get things done.
Well, yeah, you're an amazing partner, and really, it's funny, the creative operations role, right? Which is you're either scaling up, you've got more work than you have resources to get done, or you're changing direction and changing priorities. When we
Yeah, and
look,
from the last slide you had, where it noted, restructuring things, misalignment with team staffing, right? Those are risks that marketers have 24/7, right? It doesn't even take a bad economy to have that happen. You can have a bad quarter, and all of a sudden, it's typical that your marketing budget is the first thing that gets cut. And how do you, intelligently go from there?
and we've really been exploring with Phillip and clients like Phillip, some strategies to put more flexibility into your resourcing model, right? So when you're flowing with change, whether it's scaling up or scaling down, some of the approaches are really look at where your risks sit, like where are the pressures on the system. If you're not getting enough projects done, that's a very different risk than you've got budget uncertainty, and so maybe you want to hold some of that budget back. So you want to really do a risk assessment. You want to lean into the data. So that's look, we most of us have come from the creative side of the house, and so data isn't where we started our training, right? We started our training with ideas, and ideas are so powerful, and they're the beautiful part that keep me and all of us in the business. But we live in a data-driven economy, and most of us are in data-driven companies. And so as creative professionals, we actually learn how to embrace that data so that you can tell a story that the business school grads, the MBA grads that are assigning budget can kind of understand the needs of creative resourcing. And then the third way to ride it out is to really go to more flexible resourcing models. If you're being challenged to do more with less, whether that's growth oriented or uncertainty oriented, then traditional, more rigid staffing approaches just aren't going to give you the flexibility. Traditional agency relationships, traditional freelance, and most importantly, that all critical FTE number. How hard is it to get FTE budget in your organization?
Very hard. So, I think at any tech company, especially for marketing or a creative team, you're competing with engineering resources, right? Engineering, product, business, sales, those will always be top priorities. And I do like this idea that you have here, Scott, about leaning into data, because I think I've worked for tech companies for about 10 years now. And it's kind of a joke now that marketing is always the afterthought. The product comes first, then the marketing, and then the creative is always questioned, right? Everybody has a keyboard. Everybody thinks they can write an ad or design an ad. And I think for me, when I look at that bullet point of leaning into data, one thing that we've done on the operation side is, we don't just scale out the team. We're sure to, we make sure that we have, workflow software like Asana or Monday to track what we're doing, so that we can show the business stakeholders, here's how many projects we did this quarter, here's how many were on time. You can see, we have 10 projects to every contributor, so we are totally outnumbered when it comes to projects and stakeholders. And then on the other side, we work with marketing to track the impact of that, right? We want ads and creative to go out and to convert people and to show our value there. So I would say, in-house at a tech company or any company where you have your in-house creative, it's definitely a mandatory element to be showing your value in that way, because yeah, you can't just show a partner, look how great this ad is. If it's not if it's not moving the needle on the business, it's not going to be important to them.
Yeah, I think that's such a killer insight, and I'm going to share a couple slides around how you can play with that project data, particularly if you're feeling budget pressure on your team. And so that poll results are a split almost 50-50. 52 of you said that you're facing that kind of uncertainty around budget and staffing as you're going into 2023. So we feel it. Everybody on the call is going to be feeling nervous about it. But there are, as Phillip said, ways to manage that, whether it's growth oriented or whether it's uncertainty oriented. And so one of the ways is really to get more strategic with your teams and workflows. What Phillip just said, take a look at the tools you're using, take a look at the process you're using, try to understand the amount of work and the kind of work that's happening. And so from a data perspective, you take a look at your historical data by resource type to inform your planning. And then you want to really open up scope rather than boxing it in. You need to, if you're going to do more with less, you need to get more creative. Now, this isn't a formal hand, but just all by yourself watching the webinar, put your hand up if you think that you're creative, right? We are all creative. And this is part of the creative strategy side, right? Which is to take a look at the resources you've got and understand it. And then the final piece I would say when you've got uncertainty is keep the brand knowledgeable producers, particularly the project managers or the lead creatives that really have a deep understanding of your brand and campaign goals. They are the hardest to replace. You can always find creative talent. You know, the marketplace of creative talent, the pool of freelancers and agency support and short-term contract hires and FTE hires, that pool is there. And as layoffs are happening, that pool gets even stronger. But the people who know about, care about, and know how to implement your brand are the ones that you want to hold on to the most. And you're going to be able to make that case if you're taking a look at historical data around usage by resource type. Is that making any sense? Is that coming across? You know, here's a bit of a graphic that sort of talks about the mix that many of us are playing with, right? And so when I talk about unboxing your scope, it's really how do I more creatively get the right projects into the right hands? When it's not about using freelancers or not using freelancers, it's not about using partners or not using partners, or only doing things in-house. It's really about understanding what's the right mix of resources to give me the flexibility to manage my budget. If FTE hires are on hold, we all know the work doesn't go away. And so you got to figure out, how am I still going to get the work done? Because I think the number one metric that you mentioned, Phillip, is projects. How many projects are we getting and what's the value of those projects?
Yeah, and I think in situations like this, I mean, I can remember I used to be at Instacart, and we had a very small team. I inherited a team of 6 designers and copywriters, and we were incredibly underwater. This was pre-COVID, so we weren't even, our business wasn't even on fire yet. So I took a look at all the projects and estimated the hours that everyone was working on, and everyone was doing the job of 2 to 3 full-timers. When I really zeroed in on what those projects were, half of them were presentation decks for executives. Another half were, another bit were, signage for around the office. Arguably, projects that had very little impact versus shifting resources toward the things that get customers to convert and actually bring money in the door. So I would say a tip there is, actually, really having candid talks with your partners, your cross-functional partners, and then ruthlessly prioritizing the work. The sales team can maybe make their own decks, or you can outsource that to a freelancer. But to your point about keeping the knowledge or the brain trust in the brand team, I think that's what is more important, is having your in-house creative team that is living and breathing the brand be the drivers of the big strategic ideas that are really going to have a lot of impact.
Yeah, amazing point. And it connects to that data thought, right? Which is, if you're able to analyze the kind of project work that you're doing, then you can triage those projects. And it gives you the ammunition to say, maybe not always no, but like, let's find a different, more creative way of getting this done. The sales team's going to do more of their decks. We're going to lean into some freelancers for signage within the office, because that's a very templated approach. we're going to scale up our agency partnership, or maybe scale down our agency partnership so that the more strategic teams internally are still getting enough work so I can keep that brand talent. Often a question that comes up is around creative team retention, right? Would go to a lot of work to try to build an in-house team that is talented. How do we keep them? And the truth about creative people is it's not the money. Like, you
No.
got to have mistakes on the money. It's really about the work. And so if you're able to triage the most important work to your in-house most strategic teams, then your retention challenges will decrease.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that. That, you know, any creative team I've worked with, they are seeking the satisfaction of, you know, good creative work. And I think in-house it's a little bit of a different breed of person, because you are a shareholder in the company. You are contributing to the growth of the business, and you want to see the business impact at the same time. But at the same time, I've seen lots of creatives get burned out because, you know, they're getting stuck with day-to-day busy work. If you have a brilliant art director and you have them creating banner ads, you know, the same, just different sizes every day, they're going to get bored and leave. And then you have lost somebody who can bring a lot of great ideas to your marketing organization. And again, this comes to that, you know, dialing things up or down, and how do you balance out the workload?
And quarter to quarter it changes. So let me move on from, I think we've got a good feel of sort of what are some of the challenges, right? What do you do about that? So strategically, there's really 4 key questions that we need, right, to map out your resourcing strategy. The first is, what's the nature of the work? So what are the activities or deliverables that are necessary? And we might feel that we know those or know those intuitively, but it's really important to map them out, right? Data is no magic science, even though they call it data science. It's really just being a little bit more regimented in how you map it out. And it does not have to be overly complicated. So what's the work? The second question that we look at when we're trying to help a client like you, Phillip, is how much work is there and over what time frame? What's the
Yeah.
scale of the work, right? So how complex is the work? What's the scale of the work? And then what are the skills required to do the work? Like, so both what technical skills and what level of seniority or expertise is required. And then the final piece, and this is the question that is often not asked enough. What's the level of collaboration that's going to be needed to get the work done? You were talking about, you know, templated banner ads versus the first campaign set, or interior signage versus refinement of the brand for sales presentations, right? Those are very different. And there might be, if you have 47 buildings like our alumni Meta, where you're building signage is an activity at scale. There's just so many different areas. That project needs to be well done, but it doesn't necessarily need your most strategic designer on it. If you can take a look at your work for 2023 or even for Q1 and answer this question around the work, then it becomes much easier to strategically answer, these are the resources I'm going to need and why. This is the analysis that I've done. Here's the data that I'm basing it on. Right? When you make your case internally, because you love the growing up stage, the rapid growth stage of startups, how do you make your cases internally for resources? Like, what are some of the things that you need to say to management to justify budget?
Yeah, so I was actually just thinking about this today because I need to have a chat with somebody about it. I need to find out from my leaders, you know, what are the big pillars for the business that are important to them? Are we going to be growth focused? Do we need to build brand awareness? And then you align on those priorities, and then, you know, you tell, hey, this is the work that matches up with those priorities. You've asked for a lot of office signage, doesn't match that priority. We need to scale this out. And I try to also explain, again, the nature of the work that goes into it, right? Yeah. It's very easy for partners across the organization to say, hey, this involves design or this involves some copywriting, it automatically goes to the creative team. Let's just send it in. And then we are sorting out various piles of work. But we, again, to your point, Scott, on, you have some strategic creative partners. We try to explain and clarify the signage, the banner ads, that's production work. That is stuff that can be automated and streamlined very easily. It can be an always on pulse that's in the background, where you really want, your critical thinkers and your problem solvers on the more important projects. And that's how I try to characterize the nature of the work to my partners, is that we're not just a creative team that just designs and writes. We are strategic thought partners that know the business. We're in the same all hands. We know how the business is doing too. And when a request comes in, we're able to help say, hey, maybe this landing page isn't the most effective strategy for this. Maybe an email is the better solution for it. And we can be those important thought partners for you.
Yeah, you add so much strategic value, but more importantly, you align on the prioritization. And Sarah popped in a question, which I think we've been talking about. Sarah, let us know, which is, what prioritization criteria do you recommend, and do you have alignment on that? And so Phillip started with strategic objectives for the business. What are the business priorities? And then you take it down a level to, what are we going to need to know to map out our resourcing strategy? And it's not about, I want to build a bigger team or not. It's really about, these are the resources I'm going to need to match to the projects that are matched to those business priorities. And then that allows you to unbox your scope a little bit and find more creative solutions to get all that done, particularly when the word scale is in place. Let me pop into a case study. And I think we've got one more poll. Hopefully we've got time to do it. That's sort of related to the case study. So if we could pop that poll up, which is, do you find yourself facing project or production bottlenecks? I'm going to talk a little bit about another one of our clients, Coinbase, and really about flexing up and flexing down, through unpredictable markets or uncertainty. And so Coinbase is in the crypto space. The crypto space is pretty famous right now, right? It's top of the news cycle. And there is, with any growth company, just by nature of being in a rapidly changing space, there's lots of uncertainty. But the crypto space really led us into technology uncertainty in 2022. And if you go back 12 months, which really isn't very long ago, right? In January 22, they actually were asking, how do we get all of this work done? We have more marketing programs prioritized than we have capacity to execute them. And so the recommendation was really adding 360 hours of execution plugged directly into the teams across their organization. And for the first half of the year, that was just stunningly effective to help them get more done off of what they were doing. But suddenly, boom, massive market change mid-year. And they moved from flexing up to suddenly flexing down, right? So Coinbase had to realign their resources, make cuts, be more focused on their priorities and budgets, be more focused on those areas that the market had moved to support their growth. And that's all public. But really, what behind the scenes is they were able to go to their partners like Brainrider, we're a strong production partner, and say, we actually need to flex down and change the work streams we're on. And our internal studio only has so much flexibility. And frankly, they're still a little in shock, because whenever there's a reorg and people leave the organization, the creative beating heart of the organization is often the most sensitive part of that organization. And so they take a little bit more time to sort of realign around it. And so they really put their arms around their partnerships and said, look, we have less work to do. It's even more important that we execute it well. And so we retumbled the numbers together, right? And 83% of you said in response to that poll, you're faced with retumbling your numbers as well. That's emotional, hard work. How do you do it? Well, here's sort of 4 thoughts, right? you're going to be asked to do more with less, and budget and bandwidth. That means prioritization. Like, that's the starting point. Go back to what Phillip said. Let's start with, have the organizational priorities changed or shifted at all? How does that match up to priority projects? And then how are we going to be able to resource those, knowing that we can ask a lot from our teams in this situation, but we can't deliver the impossible, because the impossible by definition is impossible. So I need to articulate those needs. First thing you want to do is you want to measure, celebrate, and amplify your wins. When things are changing is when you have to remember you do great work and your team does great work. The secondly is you got to manage the risk with clear communications. You really need to talk to your stakeholders in brave language that says, sometimes now we're going to have to say no. Sometimes we're going to have to delay things more than a quarter or a month or a week. These are the organizational priorities we've aligned on, and I'm going to be ruthless for the next little while, even though I still care about you and the team to getting there. And that means leaning on your organizational chart, right? Take a look at those brand savvy and knowledgeable people on your team and hold on to them tight. And then scale your workflow with people who can integrate into your workflows. It's not the time to be onboarding a new partner. It's really the time, maybe even to be consolidating partners and say, which partner works most closely with our organization? Which partner knows us most deeply that they can get that work done quickly? How nervous are either your colleagues or your peers in the industry going into 2023, given the numbers that you've already quoted, right? Are you hearing in sort of, well, I don't know if we have any more coffee chats in the organization since we're all alone, but are you sensing that nervousness?
Yeah, I hear it all the time from friends, fellow marketers, creatives, people in ops and engineering. I think they're personally worried about their own livelihood, right, and their own position in the company. But in general, I think when it comes to the sense of how businesses are running, it just feels like there's an air of panic around. And to go back to this point of being strategically aligned for the business, I think it's a good business practice in any economy, right? Always being thoughtful and strategic will be more impactful than a scorched earth policy. And I think during boom times, you see companies they kind of put their fingers in all pots and they want to do everything. And I would say too, at times like this, it can really show what is impactful to your business and what's not. And I always think about this. This is, for me, the perfect example. I used to work at Facebook, so I have a soft spot for social media. But when I look at most companies or brands online, I don't actually know if they need social media presence. If you have a business that needs to convert people and bring in sales or bring in money, sometimes I look at brand posts on Instagram and it's a major brand and they have 20 likes. That is a molecule on a drop of mist in the infinite ocean of the internet. And so I always think about how many person hours are you putting into thinking about that social brief, that work, when you could shift those resources to paid media, email, some other channel that's more impactful. So again, ruthless prioritization on those kind of things.
Amazing thought, and that really takes me. Oops, sorry, right. You're constantly rebalancing your resources.
Yeah.
And so you want to translate those deliverables concretely in a plan that you can then support and get buy-in across the organization, because you're going to be saying no more often. And you're going to be saying things like, I know that social media has been a big part of our strategy, but we really want to retune its priority to match our corporate objectives right now. And so maybe we need to do a little bit more of this or that. And that really then breaks down into, what are the projects that I'm going to need? What are the resources that I'm going to need by project type? And it's going to change, right? There's going to be a drop off on it. So that's going to force you to examine internal capabilities to figure out where are the gaps against the new priorities. Because we were built to service different objectives 6 months ago or 12 months ago, just like Coinbase. And then what are we going to need based on those priorities? And most importantly, measuring budget and impact. So you can identify the areas with your own confidence where you can make cuts or scale down or deprioritize, and then support those decisions with the rest of the organization as you reforecast. This is a numbers chart in what's essentially a creative conversation around the execution of ideas. But it's really the part of creative operations where we can get more strategic. We don't need to get more complicated. Most of us actually have the data if we go looking for it. We just have to use that data to tell a more effective story, right? So it becomes about smart workflows in place where you're not just cutting, you're prioritizing.
Yeah,
You're not
absolutely.
just hiring, you're actually looking at flexible resourcing. You're maybe using more freelancers, you're maybe using more agency partnerships. You're holding on to the teams that are most important to you so that you can scale up or scale down. One of the most amazing things with almost every growth client I've seen restructure is that within 6 months, they're spending again. Within 6 months, the problem goes from I'm uncertain about my budget to we're no longer keeping up to the project flows that are coming our direction. Now, that's not the whole economy. You know, if you're in a more traditional industry, if you're in financial services, if you're in insurance services, you're maybe some parts of consumer packaged goods, those markets might move a little bit slower quarter to quarter, but you're still going to see those changes year over year. But Phillip, in your business, you're seeing those prioritization changes quarter to quarter, month to month, sometimes even week to week. And that's where our partnership with you has been so amazing, because we can integrate into those workflows, scale up when you need us to scale up, and then scale up within a quarter so that you don't have to say, look, I'm locked into a 12-month contract. Instead, you're able to say, look, I can adjust my resourcing quarterly. We're going to flow projects through a bit differently.
Yeah, in the past instances that I've worked with Brainrider, it really was those kind of sudden flare-ups that we needed to really scale the workout. And you wouldn't want to, dedicate the budget, the time, the resources to go out and hire 3 full-timers when you need the work to start next week. And that's Brainrider has kind of been my secret weapon in getting things done at work.
It's been a great partnership. There are lots of partners out there if you can get that kind of deep integration into your business. So they don't want to just do the work. They want to understand how you do the work and bring a model that allows you to scale up and scale down. And some questions are, we got Q&A at the end if I don't keep talking so much. But or we don't keep talking so much because I'm enjoying the conversation, Phil. It's pretty awesome. But one of the questions that just came in are, what are the major workflow implications of scaling down with your team, right? And so scaling down with your team usually means you've had both budget cuts and people cuts.
Yeah.
And the first workflow implication is you got to reprioritize.
Yes.
Right? Understand how the objectives have changed, reset your priorities against them. The second is be more flexible. You might have to ask teams to do things that they weren't doing before, but be cognizant that you want to keep those teams that are strategic. So you don't want to immediately shift everybody onto signage if you've got killer grade A, creative direction or creative director talent that's working on your teams. But you will need to say to them, look, for the next few weeks, the next month or so, we're just going to need to reprioritize. I promise to get back to you by February 14th about what we're doing to fix resourcing going forward. But in the meantime, we got to roll a little bit, and people understand that. But most importantly, it's really lean into people who understand your workflows and can plug into it quickly, as you said, so that you're not actually sitting, making the case for FTE hire, which is going to be hard in that circumstance. B, spending the quarter it takes to get a new hire up and online and then working them into the integration. If you're working with an agency partner that already has a producer team and brand knowledgeable people, lean into them because you probably have discretionary budget that's going to make those decisions happen even faster. So that's an awesome question. I'm happy to think a little bit more about that question as we go forward as well. Really, that's kind of it in terms of like the concrete slide-based thoughts that I had in place. Do you have any kind of empathy for the people on the call today in their roles? Like, what have you learned over your brilliant decade of doing this that you can share with people who are just feeling a bit alone right now in their organization in terms of growing their creative resources or realigning their creative resources?
Yeah, I think, to that question, when it comes to the implications of scaling down, right? It's tough because, everyone realizes they need to maybe take on more responsibilities or wear a few more hats to get things done. But it really is, prioritizing that core work. I mean, I'm coming from a lot of tech companies, so that's the context of everything I'm sharing. But I think, no matter what your business is, it comes down to that prioritization of what is going to be most effective for your business, right? If you were in financial services, for one of your examples, Scott, do you need to spend budget or time making TikToks? Maybe not. Maybe that's not your audience. You need to be, again, data informed about who your audience is, what they respond to, what they actually need to hear, and then give a targeted response to them. And you can shift those resources towards optimizing your emails and testing subject lines to make sure that they are being opened more often. There's always something you can do to make some of your company's core deliverables or assets a little bit more special. And an example I think of is in past years, Postmates has actually been a really good brand that has done some very dynamic email communications, so much so that it's the kind of email that people look forward to getting in their inbox because it's beautifully designed, it's exciting, it's written well. It's the kind of thing people share online because they just love that email so much. It's very clear they put resources into that, and they are getting results. And again, it goes back to being data informed, right? You might think that email is kind of an always on channel and maybe some creatives aren't too excited about working on email. But if you're really looking at the data and saying, hey, this is a channel that converts, it might seem a bit boring, but find ways to make it exciting, find ways to make it really engaging. And that will be, that really impactful, thoughtful work where you can be okay letting a few fires burn in the background of like, okay, we're just not going to worry about this channel too much now.
The power of creativity is that it levels up everything that you do if you sort of unleash it. You give yourself permission to be creative. And email's an awesome example of that. I'm gonna open up to questions. We got one that just came in. This one hits right in the middle of the heart, and that is from Jane. Says, with an in-house creative team, does it make sense to replace some with freelancers who are stronger in the particular need for a project versus keeping the existing team in-house, even if some are not the strongest in that particular area of creative need? Wow.
Yeah. No, I definitely know how that feels because, as I've led teams, sometimes you start out with a small team at a startup or an early company, and they're all juniors, right? A company will hire entry-level creatives, and they might not be the most experienced at doing a big campaign or very high-quality work. And so I have definitely filled the gaps with, sort of strategic hires for freelance or agency when it comes to skills that were lacking on the team. For example, just right now, Dandy, I do not have a motion designer on my team. So I cannot ask anyone on my team to do animation. That's just not even a reasonable request for anybody. So, we lean on Brainrider for some of those skills. In the future, we might hire a freelancer just for some very targeted projects. But I would say too, in a way to grow that creative muscle in your organization too, you want to be investing in the team as well. If you have a team of juniors, who can you hire who's more senior, or a creative leader who can nurture them and make sure that they're not just mobilizing the team to execute on work, but you're working on strategic projects that help them grow as creatives and strategic thinkers so that you have a stronger team 6 months to a year down the road.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to hit, which is, you also have, I think, a professional responsibility to help your team grow and stretch.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it might not even be that clear-cut decision between hiring a freelancer or working with an agency partner. Maybe you actually want to find a situation where you can blend those teams. And so you can say to your agency partner, I've got an awesome illustrator on my team, and I would love to have them work more closely with your motion pro, with your motion designer, so that they can actually inform the project, but also learn along the way. And in traditional agency relationships, the agency is going to be territorial about that. But in modern agency relationships where agencies are partners, then we see the advantage of sort of growing the capability. The beautiful thing about motion is once a client starts doing motion, they just start doing more motion. Like it really catches fire as a tactic internally creatively. And so you don't have to protect the demand if you're the right flexible partner who can help them flex up or flex down and create value for everyone. And so you can ask the agency, can we remember those 4 questions, right? What's the work? How much work do we have? What are the skills needed for that work? And then that last question that I want everybody to make sure they're including is, what's the level of team integration we want to be doing? We would like the agency participating in this work, but we'd like them working much closer with our team, not just on the strategy and approvals, but actually on understanding the motion elements so that we can incorporate more of that in-house. That's the kind of question that makes actually me light up because the partnership is working. But you need that deep trusting partnership to get there. So the other piece that's unstated in that question, right, is the emotion of saying some people on my team might not be right for these new priorities that we're going after. And here's the truth, which is creative professionals are awesome. I've been in this career for 35 years now, and I have loved I've been frustrated, I've yelled at, I've cried with people that I've worked with, but I have been impressed with all of them professionally and how they find ways to add value in whatever circumstances they're at. And so if your organization's priorities shift and you don't need their skills, there's actually nothing worse that you can do to a creative person than keeping them on the shelf, not using their talents fruitfully, right? We talked about how do you retain the right people? You put them on the right strategic projects. Most importantly, you use them in the areas that they're passionate about, and you have honest and clear communications where if they're not passionate about them or you can't use them, then like Sting would say, if you love them, set them free. And do it with sort of some of that care and transition that's necessary to do that well. But know that all of those professionals will find a place to go, right? So that flexible, just open up the box on your scoping and resourcing plan, and don't make it about how big is my internal team and how am I keeping the agency in their box and how am I keeping freelancers corralled, but really, how do I put together the right resourcing recommendation to reach those objectives that I'm looking for? That's a terrific question. We got a few more. I'm going to do one more question because I think we're probably running out of or almost at time. Do not remind me, this is 45. I've been having so much fun, I've kind of forgotten, but I think it's 45 minutes. Is that correct?
It's an hour actually, so you can go right up to the hour.
Then keep your questions coming in. Pardon me, I was sort of zooming in, feeling panicked that we were hitting 12:45. The next question that is in from Taylor, and that is it common for creative to do the prioritization of projects to ensure that they're the most effective for the business? Or does it need to be a collaborative effort to prioritize based on criteria?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a collaborative process. The business stakeholders are going to know inherently more. They're going to be the subject matters on the business and what is the key priority. They might have some information that is just not visible to the creative team. What the creative team can then help you evaluate when it comes to prioritizing your projects is the level of effort that it takes to get that work done. And to Scott's point, putting together the right team. For myself, as I'm leading creative teams, I have to be very honest with myself and very sober about the team's creative capabilities. So if you want to roll out a national brand campaign with a commercials starring a celebrity and things like that, you will probably need an agency that has those connections and those capabilities to scale it up really fast. But if you want to do a 30-second commercial for YouTube that is more conversion oriented, you can have your creative team brainstorm, again, going back to that fact that, you know, they are business partners, they are thinking strategically about it, they live and breathe the brand. You can have them work on the scripts and the art direction, and then you can use an agency partner for production to actually execute on that. And I've done both. I've seen in my time at Uber, we worked with Deutsch to do a national campaign. They had way more capabilities than our in-house team at the time. And my time at Instacart, we had the creative team brainstorm scripts, pitched them to stakeholders, approved things, and then we just handed it to an agency and said, okay, go make this commercial. So, you know, again, it's how are you configuring or load balancing things?
I love that answer, and it comes from deep experience. I'm going to add two other thoughts to help you out. Who's asked the question? Taylor. And that is the question: is it common for creatives to do the prioritization of projects to ensure the most effective of the business? I think it's actually a question about common language. You need to be able to understand what your stakeholders are saying and have them understand the context of the responses and analysis and value that you're bringing into the conversation. And usually you're going to have to move a lot closer to them than they ever will to you, right? The beauty about being creatives is that we are flexible thinkers. And so I have experienced a lot of flexibility on the creative side of the house in being able to speak the language of business, much more than the language of business is able to understand, you know, design and copywriting and creative cadence and inspiration. They're just too far away from it. So my personal belief, it's easier for us to come closer to our stakeholders and get a common language, which is why we're talking about business objectives and prioritization and spelling out resource needs more concretely, the 4 strategic questions you need to build a resourcing case, and why your resourcing, you know, shouldn't really be in terms of this is the amazing art director that we need on the business because I love their creative, their use of space and their book, isn't really going to sell nearly as well as these are the kind of projects that we're being asked to do by marketing and product teams. These are the skill sets that are going to need to be able to do that at a competitive level, and therefore this is the talent and resourcing model that I would like to do. It's the same answer, it just uses the language of your business stakeholder, Taylor. So that's the first half of it. Is it common for the creatives to do the prioritization of projects to ensure their effective business? Every time they do that. Every time a creative gives you a point of view, they're thinking about it that way. What's not as common is that they're like Phillip, where they can use the language of the business to answer that question as opposed to our creative vernacular, right? The curse of knowledge means that what we know we find impossible to explain to others. So use the language of the others to explain it back to them, and they're more likely to understand it. The second half of your question, does it need to be a collaborative effort to prioritize based on criteria? Phillip addressed the collaborative part, which is yes, always, yes, always, 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 yes. Our number one job should be breaking down silos, moving faster, collaborating more, getting to better answers with more viewpoints freely expressed on the table. I love that answer. But the second half of it's also important, based on criteria. Use your data. Have your stakeholders understand where your data is going to build your plans, so that you're not saying, hey, here are the showcase campaigns we did this year. Don't they look amazing? Don't you love the creative? That feels so good, and they will love the creative. But when it comes to budget time, they'll ask you, can you get it done for less? Every time. If you show them how much you're actually getting done and what it takes to get it done, then you're doing the education that Phillip talked about earlier, and then that makes it much easier.
Yeah, I would add,
ahead.
Scott.
Yeah, go.
as you build out creative teams or work with creative partners, I just can't emphasize enough how important it is on the collaboration part to have sharing sessions where your teams are educating each other on what they do. You know, when I first started, I had no idea what a product marketer did. But it's a key part of the process, right? They are setting the positioning and the messaging for the product or the company, and then the creative team needs to take it from there and articulate that to a more commercial audience. But the more you work together, have debriefs, talk about what went well, what didn't work well, you will be learning from each other and getting that shared language that Scott was talking about. You can understand the creative world a little bit more, they understand the business world a little bit more, and you will work better together, especially when times are tough and resources are tight.
Especially when times are tougher. Yeah, love that. It's all even more important to have visibility into the business. You know, I kind of hate school. I loved going through school when I went through school because it was social and I loved learning, but I really hated the process of school. And one of my reflections on it is because school does a good job sometimes of teaching you fundamentals, but it does a really bad job of teaching you the now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What's going on right now. And so this is the most educated generation of creative professionals I have ever worked with. They're fierce and feisty and independent and outspoken, and they have learned more about the process of creating than anyone else I've ever worked with. But you're still learning stuff that's kind of frameworks from the past as business is evolving real time. And so those sharing sessions are in fact how you take that education and your knowledge as a designer or copywriter, motion pro, producer, director, whatever, and you put it in the context of the now by learning from each other real time. That's the kind of learning that fuels us going forward. And so it's a brilliant one. We do them internally. Everybody's under an NDA, and so we're actually able to share the projects that people are most proud of cross-client as well. You know, once that project goes public, then it's seen in the world. But the context and the creative process of getting there is for the real fuel. And I love those sessions. They're really shout out Fridays, and then in our huddle shout out Tuesdays they happen. So a very similar approach to collaboration, turning it from a word into a practice within an organization, and starting, I think, when you're small and growing. I think it's Way says, how do you prevent creatives from burning out on retainer accounts? And let me actually reframe that question slightly, because creatives burn out internally and externally, whether you're agency side or whether you're in an internal agency side, you can burn out. So what are you watching for in terms of symptoms of burnout? What are you listening for? What kind of discussion do you like to have? And then what are your tactics or support options for your internal teams, Phil?
Yeah, so I think when you go into the creative work industry, it's all very subjective, right? This is the world we have chosen to work in, and I think you go in knowing that things will be turbulent, priorities will always change, and then on top of that, the work is very subjective, and there's going to be a lot of feedback there. So, internally, I think it's easier to motivate people because we're part of the business, right? We really need to make this product a success. The success of the product teams or the sales team is our success too, because we are supporting that. And so I think you can get the creative satisfaction from seeing that impact. As I mentioned earlier, right, you want to keep your creatives focused on the more strategic work, things that are going to have bigger impact, rather than having them focused on what we call production work, which is just simple, easy things to do, right? Signage for the office, banner ads that need to be resized. Those things can be shifted, and you can move those to another resource. The people who do that work also get burned out, which I think you were saying, Scott, too. And I have this personal example too, because I've done freelance in my past as well, which I think the answer to either one is just being a good partner and being very clear and concise on what your expectations are, what the priorities are, asking for feedback on your feedback if it's clear enough. I had a client once, I was just making extra money. I was happy to make the extra money freelancing. But I ended up quitting the job because the briefs came in and they were very vague and unclear. And even though I could charge more because we had so much thrash and I kept adding to my hours, it ultimately wasn't worth it because the stakeholder and I had to keep having conversations on, just basic standards for ads online. If a Facebook ad required 120 characters of text, this person wanted to shove a paragraph into that space. And I had to keep telling them, like, I understand, but it actually won't fit. So we need to get it to this size. And again, it really comes down to, having a customer service mindset with your partners, right? When I run a creative team, I let them know that, when we work with partners, it is in service of the business. It is in service of them. We want to make their campaign a success. We want the business to succeed. Even as a freelancer, that's the mindset I bring. But I think as a stakeholder, you should also have that mindset when you're asking the creative team to do that work, is how are you setting them up for success with a super clear brief, time to think about the work, giving clear feedback that matches their language, versus, make it pop. Hey, I don't think that the color in the background is working. That is more helpful to a designer than saying make it pop. So again, it comes down to just understanding each other. And as you have those sharing sessions and those collaboration sessions, debriefs, postmortems, whatever you call them, you'll learn from each other and get better from there.
I think that's great advice. And we're running out of time. So let me say this to everybody. First of all, thanks everybody who joined us today, and a big thanks to you, Phillip. I often think of all of us as being in the change business. Marketing does not stay static.
Yes.
Finance teams think that the world changes, but I did accounting, studied accounting in 1989, and it's not all that different today, right? But the world of marketing is a brand new world. And we are very reactive to changes in markets and changes in the overall community or economy and changes within consumers. And the thing about change is creative people love change because it offers new opportunities, but it's also can be really scary and it's definitely emotional. Right? We are the feeling side of the business, everybody on that call. And so we are all going to be feeling this change that's happening right now and trying, as we do, to try to figure it out. I think the first thing that I would say is you're not alone. One of the things I really appreciated is having you on the conversation today, Phillip, because it just feels human to be talking about ideas and learning and best practices and experience with someone who's lived it and someone who's lived it together with Brainrider. So thank you for that. But I can say that to everybody else on the call. You are not alone either. Henry Stewart and other organizations in the creative ops field are really, it's a growing field. It's really being recognized for the value that it brings to a business. We at Brainrider have been working hard to sort of publish information. We get lots of resources to help you out, but we also have lots of conversations. We're not a very selly organization, but if you need someone to listen to you and understand what your needs are, and then maybe we're right or maybe we're wrong, but at least we will help you think up and frame your data and your needs and your priorities differently, reach out to us or reach out to your existing awesome partners and your existing awesome people to get it done. But the number one thing to do as we go into 2023 is don't feel or be alone. This is too much to take on without building great partnerships. And so big thank you to Henry Stewart and for having us on, and a big thank you to you, Phillip. It was an awesome conversation and you were amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Sarah says, this has been great. Appreciate the timely topic. There's a few more questions that have come in, so I'll try to get those answered one-on-one. Feel free to reach out to myself and Phillip. I don't know if you mind people reaching out to you through LinkedIn or not, but Phillip is, if you can get his thought on your business, he's ruthlessly prioritizing internally. So he may not have the time, but if you can ever connect with him in person, it's really worth it because he's awesome. that's what I got for today. Any last thoughts for you?
No, I mean, that's all sounds great. Thank you for, having me. And yeah, everyone can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Always happy to chat. And I think, it is just good practice, this networking aspect of just helping each other out during this time. You never know what it can lead to, and it always has positive outcomes.
Amazing. Thanks. And bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye. Bye, Scott. Bye, Philip.
Bye.